The Rhone River Valley stretches from north to south. In the north, it starts at the city of Vienne, which is just 15-20 minutes south of Lyon. And the Rhone runs down 200 kilometers until it finally ends into the Mediterranean Sea. In the north, the Rhone Valley is a quite narrow, small river valley and wine-growing region where east and west, so left and right of the river valley, there are not a lot of wine-growing areas, whereas in the south, it stretches to each side of the valley in quite wide areas. For example, Côte du Luberon and Côte de Pierrevert, they are not actually located directly at the Rhone River Valley. In general, the Rhone Valley is divided into two different zones. In the north, it is called Septentrional, so the northern Rhone, and the Mediterranean part is called La Zone Méridionale. This is in the south. It can be called a warm wine-growing area, not moderate climate anymore, but warm, and in the south even hot, because we have an average growing season temperature of roughly 20 degrees. In the north, as you can see, we have quite a lot of rainfall. 923 millimeters is quite a lot. In the south, it's more dry. And in the north, we have sometimes really poor weather conditions when flowering occurs. And also due to the humid conditions, quite a lot of fungal diseases. Whereas in the south, it's rather drought that causes a problem, so the lack of water. In the north, we have really red grape variety Syrah dominating. So there's mostly Syrah in the north, which in other parts of the world became famous as Shiraz. So in Australia, they call it Shiraz, but also other New World countries would put Shiraz on the label rather than Syrah. So I have seen Shiraz from South Africa, but also the US and from Chile. And it is exactly the same grape variety, that's Syrah. We also find Carignan in the north. And these are the two main red varietals in the northern part. So the Septentrional. And we have also interesting white grape varietals in the northern part. Most importantly, Viognier, but also Marsanne and Roussanne. The southern part, called Rhone Méridional, has a higher growing season temperature. It has less rainfall. In the very south, it is really very dry, and we have other grape varieties that dominate. And those are quite similar to the ones of the neighboring wine-growing region, which is Provence. So we have here Grenache, also Syrah, then Carignan, then a grape variety called Cinsault, that's the pronunciation, Cinsault, and we have Mourvèdre. Cinsault and Mourvèdre also play an important role in the Provence, where they produce rosé wines out of those varietals, also from Grenache. The dominating red grape varieties and we mentioned 90% of the wines are red, are Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre. Other important ones are Carignan and Cinsault. We mentioned that a very small proportion is dedicated to white wine production, so roughly 4%. A very famous wine, which is white, comes from the Rhone Valley, and this is made from Viognier grape. So there are very few wines that are single varietal wines, and the white ones are very often blends, but there is a famous white wine, which I will refer to later on when I talk a little bit more in detail about the regions, and this is made from Viognier. Other whites are mostly blends from Marsanne and Roussanne. Other varietals that we find is Grenache Blanc, Clairette, and Bourboulon. In the Rhone Valley, we have the most important wines that are known across the world are either dominated by Syrah in the north and have in addition in small proportions some Grenache, Mourvèdre and Cinsault, or in the south, most importantly Châteauneuf-du-Pape, we have Grenache dominated wines and up to 5, 6 or even 10 different grape varieties included in the blend, but of small proportions. The AOCs that you find here in bold letters, in bold writings, are really world famous ones and quite expensive ones. So in the north, most importantly, Hermitage and Gros Hermitage, as well as Côte Rôtie, which are red wines dominated by Syrah. They were actually the idol wines for the entire Australian approach of planting Syrah in Australia. And we have white Condrieu and Châteaubriand. And these are the two AOCs that consist of one single varietal, and this is Viognier. Also, those two became very famous, but mostly among specialists. They're quite high priced, and you find Condrieu that cost 50, 60 euros. Châteaubriand is at a price point of around 80 to 100. And the most famous wines from Hermitage, Gros Hermitage and Côte Rôtie, they sell for 150, 200 euros or more. In the south, we find one really dominating AOC, which became world famous, and this is Châteauneuf-du-Pape. The other AOCs in the south are very well known within France, but not so much on an international level. Châteauneuf-du-Pape would translate into the new castle of the Pope. This is an historic background and an historic event which gave it the name. There was one point in history when the Catholic Church was kind of divided, and there were two popes, one in Rome and one in France, and the whole of Europe was kind of divided, and the new castle of the Pope came from that times when one of the two popes lived in France, which is a historical detail that could help you remember this appellation's name. We have some impressions here that are really typical for the northern part of the Rhone. where you have steep vineyards which are really concentrated on the river, on the boards of the river, on the river valley, because before climate warming and climate change occurred, in the surrounding areas, you had not so favorable climatic conditions. Nowadays, also the northern Rhone, especially in this part, they have very dry summers. And with climate warming, we also see alcohol levels going up, actually dramatically. And also in the northern part, we find the expensive wines and the wines with a lot of prestige with 14.5 alcohol, and the Châteauneuf du Pape in the south, they rarely have less than 14.5 alcohol.